Joining me today is Lorraine Merrill, who's the Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Markets and Food. So I got the full name in there. I want to talk about small farming, agriculture. And New Hampshire isn't an island unto itself. Vermont isn't an island unto itself.
Small states.
We deal with the federal bureaucracy. And, what I'm getting at is the Food Safety Modernization Act. I don't fully understand that legislation.
You wouldn't be the only one.
But the conversations I've had with people is the initial thing really would have killed small farmers. And you talked about the growth in New Hampshire was farmers selling to their local communities. And it seemed like this whole act would really obliterate that business. Am I way off base in my perception, or?
Well, we had many concerns about the first set of rules that were proposed under the Food Safety Modernization Act. We had concerns about it when the law was written, and some of our own senators and Congress people helped to make sure that there were some exemptions for small farms and so forth. But then the way it actually turned out and the way the rules were proposed, that really didn't do much insulating of our small farms.
The exemptions weren't fully exempted?
And the requirements of what we all call it FSMA now.
Okay.
Initially they were so burdensome, not just for small farms, but for all of our farms.
But that would mean only the big farms could survive to handle
it was going to be easier. It's so often the case, more regulation tends to favor the large-scale operators because they can better afford to do the right and afford whatever technology is required and so forth. They have those economies of scale. So we had worked very hard. We pulled together in New Hampshire a FSMA task force, which included representatives from our department, from the Department of Health and Human Services Food Protection section, from UNH Cooperative Extension, both on the agricultural production expertise side and also on the food safety side of Extension, and farmers, representatives from New Hampshire Farm Bureau and other growers worked together to analyze those proposed rules, identify what the impacts would be, what we had issues with, and then we actually got the FDA. Congresswoman Annie Custer helped to get the FDA to come and hold a public session here in New Hampshire. It was in Hanover.
Yep.
We had hundreds and hundreds of farmers from across northern New England.
Right. I remember farmers from Vermont came over.
Absolutely.
It was a big deal.
Big event. And our farmers were so articulate in explaining exactly what the problems were with these regulations. And the FDA sent top people to that event. There were similar forums around the country. And just in the last month, FDA, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, came out with their revised rules proposal. And the biggest concerns that New Hampshire farmers and growers and Vermont farmers and growers had seem to have been addressed reasonably well. It's certainly greatly improved over what it was before. It's still going to be expensive and a challenge, and there are some questions about how much water testing, for example, has to be done. But it does seem as though FDA listened.
Well, yeah, and that's where I want to get at. What are the things that farmers found so burdensome in that rule? I mean, the average person may say, well, it's food safety, it's modernization, it sounds good. What were the problems?
Well, for our small and diversified farms, there were things like, no matter how small the farm was, if they received food from another neighboring farmer that they would then perhaps sell at their stand, or
so I raise corn, you raise zucchini. If I sell your zucchini?
Yes, you suddenly became subject to a whole bigger set of rules than just the fresh produce rules. There were really severe restrictions on the use of manure as fertilizer, which just made it completely impractical, which would mean you wouldn't be able to use that organic,
I would have thought all
traditional.
organic farms would say, well, I've been using this for decades.
Exactly, and it was
Millennia.
The period of time that was required between application and harvest was much longer than what the USDA organic rules require. So that was a major one, manure and compost. The testing of water, so whether it was irrigation water, water used in washing produce, fresh produce and so forth, they just required so many tests, and it's very expensive. And there wasn't really a scientific basis for the frequency of testing of these water sources. So those are some of the top concerns, but there were many.
Okay, well, we're out of time in this segment.